We are ready to talk wide receivers and tight end prospects in the NFL draft. We are joined once again by Travis May. I mentioned this at the end of the Monday episode, but you can follow him on Twitter at FF_TravisM to find out all the stuff that he has got going on over at A to Z Sports covering college football. Travis, you can correct me on this. As I said it, I think I said Z on the first episode. I'm saying Z. How do the people here on the show at the moment pronounce that particular letter? Is it Z or
just
Z?
Z? I think it's just Z. I think that's your across the pond thing coming in.
Shawn, hit me with it. Is that a very across the pond thing?
Travis and I are just looking at you like we don't know what you're doing, but we like it. At least
Is
sounds
Zed
great.
a thing?
Sounds
it's
great.
Not a thing. Doesn't exist.
No, we don't really say Zed over here, but
I don't know if we say Zed over here either. But that was what came out of my mouth. So
okay.
Somebody I'm sure will be able to correct. I'll have to Google that after the show just to see what has gone wrong with my linguistic skills at this point. But we are going to jump into wide receivers. That is much more important. We're going to dive into tight ends then. But we had a fantastic show on Monday. I would urge people, if they haven't checked it out, to head back and listen to that. And obviously, you can do that after you finish up here today, listening to this episode of RotoViz Overtime. But as always, joined by Shawn Siegele. And I know Shawn was excited to jump into some of these wide receiver prospects.
Yeah, let's do it. We got a deep class here at the receiver position, but there are two guys at the top. You have Marvin Harrison, who you mentioned on the previous show as possibly a generational talent. Even off topic, that came into play. We were discussing, how those first 5 picks are going to play out. If you want to know how they're going to come off the board, again, check out that episode. Travis has you covered there. Malik Nabers is described as the wide receiver 1 in most classes, which, again, that's something where, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. He's the wide receiver 2, right? But is this truly like a 1A, 1B situation? Or, I'm kind of dying for you to make the case that Malik Nabers is the wide receiver 1, but help us with these 2 prospects.
I'm not going to make that case. But I will say that Malik Nabers, basically what he did last season from like an efficiency standpoint, basically breaks whatever modeling you want to try to build. Because when you talk about the average projection or production profile for, drafted wide receivers, key predictive metrics like yards per team pass attempt, for example, like the average drafted player, in their peak season, they might have like 2.5 yards per team pass attempt, which is exactly what it sounds like. Malik Nabers is like, nah, bro, I'm going off the charts. I'm going to have 4 yards per team pass attempt, which is just absurd efficiency. That should not even be possible. Like what he was doing was unreal. Like when I have this kind of guardrails model that I build mid-season, looks at 4 or 5 different things, key rate stats, and then a few different like per game adjustments for the same thing, and builds like a predictive, hey, this is like an nth percentile profile. It's scaled around 50. It's supposed to be like 50 is like the middle, and you shouldn't be able to go over 100. He broke the model. Like I couldn't nerf his profile to get under 100. Like, so Malik Nabers, what he did last year from an efficiency standpoint as a receiver was wild. And so I get
so wide receiver 1, just put him up there.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. Like,
Shawn, make him record the clip again, like we did.
Oh my gosh. I got to say it. I got to record the clip for the, yeah. Oh my gosh. No, but he's right there. I think 1A, 1B is very, very fair. And to be honest, Odunze, if he was like an early declare, I think he would check all the boxes to be a 1A, 1B, 1C. So I think it's really close between all 3. But Malik Nabers, if his name was Marvin Harrison Jr., I think we might have a lot more people leaning his direction.
Well, what's the case for Harrison beyond the obvious that you're Marvin Harrison Jr., you're bigger, and you put up some very impressive numbers, but
yep.
I'm always making the case that if not for the cheap shot in the 2022, however you want to kind of label those playoffs, that they would have won the national title, and CJ Stroud would have been the easy number 1 pick.
Yep.
Again, you can say that because it's hard to prove otherwise. But why is Marvin Harrison number 1?
So dating back to his recruiting journey, he was always a dominant recruit, but he wasn't like a 5-star guy. But when he stepped on campus at Ohio State, at the time, he was the first, like the earliest true freshman, I believe, to have his black stripe removed from the helmet in spring practices, because like that's their ritual thing. Like once you've proven that you can, be a true part of the team in terms of preparation, how you dominate in practice, you get to take the stripe off. So he was the first one, even amid an absolutely stacked wide receiver class, one of the best we've ever seen in college football history. He was the one who stood out the most from day one, from like practice one. And so we knew that he was going to be special. And then, of course, he caught 3 touchdowns in his true freshman season Rose Bowl game, which was incredible. And so the hype went off the rails at that point. But then you go and post like back-to-back, like 99th percentile kind of combined production profile seasons, when compared to all other top wide receivers. And you go, okay, that's ridiculous. He's got the Hall of Fame dad. He's got better size, and I know we didn't get the testing, but he's got some crazy, like above 22 mile an hour plays verified by on-field tracking data. So he's got some crazy athleticism. He's got not just 1 year, but 2 years of elite production. And that's where there's a slight difference in that Nabers didn't have like 99th percentile and then off the charts. Marvin Harrison had 2 years where it was just absolutely bonkers dominant production, adjusted for whatever way you want to do that. So he has the pedigree. He has got the dominance from day one of his college career. And the only reason he didn't break out truly as a freshman is because there were 2 first-round wide receivers ahead of him. So,
well, was there a receiver who gained 300 yards in that bowl game you mentioned?
Yeah, Jackson Smith and Jigbo was okay. I think he was fine as well. But you're splitting a bunch of time with guys like Jason. It's hard to have a crazy analytically sound profile, and he still did in years 2 and 3, splitting some time with Emeka Ibuka as well, who will probably be a first-round pick next year. So I don't know. It's just I'm really impressed by both their profiles. Both were alphas in every way that we like to see, analytically speaking, and check all the boxes from a film standpoint. So yes, it's probably 1A, 1B, but Marvin Harrison Jr., I just have to give him the nod because the entire process from start to finish, best wide receiver in the class.
You mentioned Odunze and that he may be the third option, or I think you said the C in terms of when Shawn was trying to make the case for the 1A, 1B. What are your thoughts on him here as we enter into, I guess, the NFL draft, but then into the NFL season? Last year, we've seen a year where, older rookies come in and had pretty strong seasons to kick off their NFL career at the pro level. Is he the next one to do that?
I think so. And one, he's hilarious. Like talking to him in person, he was just constantly joking. Had some phenomenal answers to some absolutely outlandish questions that I think somebody from TMZ threw his way at the combine, which is awesome. But he's just making fun of how massive Johnny Wilson was. It was just a good time, good interview, really intelligent guy. Checked all the boxes at the combine physically, and he wanted to come back. He could have been an early-ish pick. He wouldn't have been a top 10 pick, but he could have been an early-ish pick last year. But he came back because he really just wanted to see how far this special group could go at Washington. He understood how good Jalen McMillan was, how good Jalen Polk was, how good Michael Penix was coming off of that season, and he wanted to come back. He could. This is not one of those situations where, well, he only came back. He's only where he is now because of this strong finish to his career. He was already doing really great things before. Was it like 95th percentile plus adjusted production numbers? No, but that's actually not necessarily how Kalen DeBoer's offenses typically work in terms of target distribution. And so understanding the scheme in Washington and how they typically distribute targets, you're going to know that his peak profile is not going to look the same. Very reminiscent of how USC's target distribution was even a few years back when trying to analyze like a Michael Pittman or an Amon-Ra St. Brown. The peak wasn't necessarily there, but you could understand adjusting for the situation that it just wasn't necessarily a possibility. But even so, last year, Odunze went off. So really impressed by his final season. But even before that, he was doing special things.
And after those guys, let's put them into a trio. After those guys, are there any players that maybe aren't getting as much focus and kind of deserve more attention going into the draft? Maybe a Jalen McMillan or a Javon Barker?
So Jalen McMillan is, because of how how he kind of missed some time with injury, was dinged up and played through injury actually for much of last year. His profile looks a little wonky. But he was coming into the year, like there were conversations like, hey, Jalen McMillan might not even be the second best. He might be as good. He's in the mix to be as good as Odunze. I know we forget that because, how things went for Odunze this year. But McMillan was the reason, like the sole reason they beat Oregon in the second matchup and the championship game for the Pac-12 last year. He had huge plays in the playoffs. He just very much reminds me, profile-wise, pedigree-wise, of Amon-Ra St. Brown. He was a top 100 recruit, came in, very similar stylistically, size, speed, everything to Amon-Ra St. Brown. Does not have the perfect production profile throughout college because he's in a system that has an odd target distribution. And with him, he had an odd finish to his year and didn't have a peak season because he's playing with another first-round pick and a guy in Jalen Polk who might be a second-round pick. So there's other players around him worthy of targets taking the attention away, and thus he might fall to round 3 or 4 in the real NFL draft when it's all said and done. But I'm still going to be drafting him aggressively. So he's the number one that's not getting enough attention.
And so looking at him, one of the things that really jumped out to me when I was trying to put together his profile for our rookie guide is that even though it seems like Polk is getting more attention right now and is being projected to go earlier, the McMillan actually had the stronger overall profile and is probably, both a little safer and has a little more upside. Is that the way you're looking at it, or just Polk also very, very good?
Polk is very good. It's just McMillan's better. Analytically speaking, the peaks were fantastic. And if we do kind of a game-adjusted look at his profile, it is better. But just from an on-field and dominant standpoint and versatility standpoint, McMillan moved all over the place, and they tried to find unique ways to make him kind of a focal point and a mismatch nightmare. He spent a lot of time outside. Like for a whole season, they moved him inside for a whole season, moved him more outside, and then split him up. And his role was kind of constantly changing because they were like, hey, we need to get creative with him because we can. And so to me, he should be firmly inside of everyone's top 10 wide receiver rankings. That is Jalen McMillan.
And what do you have for us on Baker here? I know he was the other player that you were really excited about who's not getting enough attention.
Yeah, so Baker, I talked to him a couple times at the Combine, at the Senior Bowl. Really interested to talk to him about how he found success in the deep game because at Alabama, he was kind of buried behind future first rounders, right? Had to leave town to get the opportunity that we knew he could kind of earn for himself. In year one at UCF, or at least I guess in 2022, he actually was top 20 in air yards among all wide receivers in college football, which was wild because he had an okay season that year, but he had a lot of unfulfilled production because John Rice Plumlee, the quarterback, could not hit him. He's just not a great passer. He wasn't even a good passer this year, but he just got a lot more in sync with Javon Baker and understanding that, how he creates separation in the timing. They improved together. And when they did improve together, of course, Javon Baker was like the most efficient deep ball threat in the country, averaging almost 22 yards per reception, which is absolutely insane. So we saw the potential even as a recruit. We saw it at Alabama at times, but when he was given the opportunity to be the focal point of the offense, UCF was like, hey, we just have to give you the ball, especially in the vertical stem, like the comeback stuff. He just really he does a great job creating separation for himself. And his peak profile looks nice. I don't like to, circulate stuff that's not real, but there at the Senior Bowl and Combine, there were things that I heard that were kind of off-field concerns. And so I do believe there's a chance he drops further on draft day than, fantasy Twitter would like him to. So I think there's almost no way he's going to be a round 2 or 3 pick at this point. But even so, that's great because it makes him cheaper for us in rookie drafts. So I am still going to confidently be overdrafting Javon Baker when it's all said and done.
And so the kind of underwhelming side speed elements there don't worry you with what you got to see on the field.
No, because I mean, like how he sets up defenders, how he creates space for himself, just practically from an on-field, film-based standpoint. I'm not as concerned. And really, frankly, combine stuff for wide receivers, I mean, you've probably over the years talked through this quite a bit yourself, but like speed at the combine almost negatively correlates to future production. So it's not necessarily that something I am really worried about unless he follows below, like some meaningful threshold and he's like crazy slow and that just doesn't match up with the film. But Javon Baker is still one of my favorites for sure.
Well, you mentioned how these fast receivers can get overdrafted and as a result end up with some crazy results in the projections when you have draft slot included. And that brings me to our favorite guy, Travis. Colm and I did a show recently where I claimed that I think Xavier Worthy should be drafted in the top 10. Now, obviously, only 10 guys can actually go that high. It does seem like he's gotten to the edge of the first round. But one of your high profile, fun, certainly striking pieces for RotoViz. Several years ago, obviously when this actually occurred, you talk about Xavier Worthy as having the greatest freshman receiving season ever. Then he runs the 4.21. What are we looking at now with him?
He might go inside.
The next two seasons were not as good as the greatest freshman season ever.
Yeah.
Or we'd be talking about top 5.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, his profile, even though it looks silly when you put it on a chart next to everyone else's, because his true freshman season's like off the charts with everyone else, and then he just kind of levels up and everyone catches up on the next 2 seasons. But a lot of that had to do with the surrounding players around him staying healthy, them bringing in another future first-round wide receiver in Adonai Mitchell, them developing, like I said on last week's episode, even talking about Jonathan Brooks, like developing JT Sanders as like a third option at tight end. They didn't have to force targets to Xavier Worthy to be an effective offense. And they were better because they had 3 really proven first and second round weapons to go along with Xavier Worthy. So I'm not concerned. I mean, he was playing through a broken hand. There were a few weeks where he was literally he had a club on one hand and his other hand was free. And he's out there actually trying to catch the ball with a freaking club wrapped around his hand. It was just the most ridiculous thing. It's like, dude, just take a week off. He struggled with drops.
He has really
when
bad
he was,
catch numbers during this time period. Is that explain all of this?
That was it. That was 100%. And so, and as he's trying to recover from that, maybe some concentration drops, just as he's reteaching his other hand to close right. So, but beyond that, like just immaculate profile. And so, really requisite, threshold numbers every single year. You wanted to see the progression beyond that incredible freshman year, but the game, like on-field numbers, athletic numbers translate, not just straight line. Like when I've talked to real NFL analytics staffers, they've been asking me about him just through my time at Mojo and building the sports stock market. I got to know some of them, and they were asking me about specifically, like the first player they asked about was Xavier Worthy because of his on-field athletic numbers, not his production profile, because of what he does in and out of breaks is just inhuman. So, the way he kind of almost accelerates through his breaks is just phenomenal. So I think he translates into being way more than just speed. And I think there's a real chance he's a top 20 pick, given what I know from a few key teams that are actually picking in that range.
So you're not doing anything to lower our excitement levels?
Absolutely not.
Well, you have actually taken it from the top 10 picks to the top 20. So you have, lowered it a little bit. But.
Well, yeah, but I will say that there's a very non-zero chance he's the wide receiver 4 off the board, ahead of Brian Thomas Jr., ahead of A.D. Mitchell and Troy Franklin and whoever else, McConkey, whatever else people want to throw in there. There's a great chance, given the teams I know he's met with and given the teams I know who've told me they're interested in him, very, very great chance he doesn't make it past like pick 20 to 21 in that kind of range.
It's interesting indeed. And then moving on to somebody you did mention there was Brian Thomas. He looked like a superstar at the combine, caught 17 touchdowns last season. And the big question here would be across their careers, the gap between him and Nabers appears to be quite large. Shawn has written here on the show sheet the size of the Grand Canyon. I have to add that in. But is Thomas somebody who could sneak into the top 15 potentially? And do you think that he could make that step between college and the pros maybe a little bit smoother than Nabers?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure he's going to be, smoother than Nabers, because Thomas was interesting. So like how they utilized Thomas, I just kind of wrote this up, just talking about the next breakout wide receiver at LSU this week. Thomas was like almost strictly always like an outside guy, and his route tree was a little bit less expansive, and how he was utilized and what he was asked to do was not as extensive as Nabers. Like Malik Nabers was all over the field, inside, outside, in motion before the snap. What he was doing was just really creative. They were like, hey, this is our chess piece. This is our winning piece. This is how we're going to dominate. And so like it's clear there's a big difference between Malik Nabers and Brian Thomas just from a talent, wide receiver, on-field playing the position standpoint. But Thomas just moves in a way that you shouldn't be able to move at his size. And that showed up when he was like a 97th, 98th percentile kind of athlete by most every measure at the combine. So I think initially his role, wherever he goes, is going to be a little bit more limited. A la, like a Michael Thomas or not Michael Thomas, Michael Pittman or DK Metcalf standpoint, where it's mostly simple like vertical stuff, fades and your slants, your comebacks, a little bit limited in that regard. And that might limit, the upside. He's not going to be a 1,500 yard wide receiver for you right out the gate. But even so, I think you could have like that really safe DK Metcalf 900 yards plus start to his career right away, because he has that elite athleticism to go with. Hey, he's going to be an X wherever he goes, like every down starter immediately. And so I think he could creep into the top 20 picks too. That would be wild if we saw 5 wide receivers go into the top 20 picks, but I think there's a real chance because they're so unbelievably good.
Well, Charles, we have a couple other guys too who are very serious threats to at least go in the first round. You look at Adonai Mitchell. I think that he had a more interesting production background than people may realize. And I mean, you look at his body, his athleticism. I mean, this is the type of player you look at and think, I mean, not Calvin Johnson, but you think, I mean, this is an alpha receiver, an unstoppable, physical threat out there. The type of player who, certainly if you flash back, 6, 7, 10 years, you really want to see that guy. I mean, an Andre Johnson. What can he be when you think about underrated production, athleticism, or am I overstating kind of what he is?
No, I think people he's a weird one because he was just really streaky in terms of production, productive at right key moments, whether it was at Georgia or at Texas. He just kind of always found a way to make the big play, especially in the red zone. Most of his 20% of his catches or something silly are touchdowns for his career, because he finds a way to dominate at a catch point and in subtle ways kind of set defenders up to create separation or late separation, and utilizes late hands to kind of set up people even when he doesn't necessarily create the separation naturally on field. And when people have been talking to him, when I was talking to him some this spring even, he's got this weird thing in terms of pacing, how he plays the game. He doesn't always actually run as hard or fast as he can because he doesn't have to, which is such a weird thing to admit, like throughout your draft process, that you haven't really ever like run as fast as you can, like in game. But it's because he's smart about how he sets up defenders. And so just practically on the field, he's a really great, I kind of talked about last episode, Marshawn Lloyd being a process guy. I think AD Mitchell is a really process-oriented wide receiver, and he really rounded out his game to be a more consistent down-to-down guy as well this year at Texas. So he always had the dominant red zone threat going for him, but this year he really rounded out his game to be a more proven down-to-down guy and really fixed his production profile in year 3 or whatever it was for him. And so for him to kind of fix his production profile in his most important season, I think it was underrated. I think people have come around on him, and now he's a first-round projection for some. And so, yeah, I think he tested out as maybe a slightly even more impressive athlete than Brian Thomas. And so I expect great things from him too. I know it's hard to not talk up everyone in this class when it comes to wide receivers because they're just so darn good. But AD Mitchell definitely looks like a fringe, imperfect production profile, but a fringe because of physicality, top 40 kind of pick in the real draft.
Well, speaking of players who could go in that range, and someone who I think we could argue is even more controversial. You have Keon Coleman. He's got a very weird production profile that is fairly hard to understand, and yet the scouting elements seem to really push him up. And then you have the combine, and it's really weird, where he doesn't test particularly well, and then he dominates the gauntlet. How are people looking at that and kind of putting these weird pieces together?
People really want Keon Coleman to be a thing. So like the gauntlet thing, that blew up on Twitter and everywhere else because, there was all this hype. And so to be honest, people needed a reason to be excited about him. So like, oh my gosh, he's running fast in this gauntlet drill that doesn't really mean anything. That's fantastic. But like, again, it doesn't really mean anything. It's cool that they're doing this in spandex and whatever. And they're like, oh, I got to turn my head real quick and make a catch. Oh, I got to do it again. Like that's, guys. Yeah, I think that's just overreaching, trying to make it something happen that might just not happen. So, like, at Michigan
you weren't
State,
concerned about Troy Franklin's
no, I'm not
crazy
not
route across the gauntlet.
Oh my goodness, he squiggled a yard off the center line. Oh man, that means I gotta, completely fade him and forget his entire college career. So there's overanalysis that week in gobs. So crazy. That week. But Keon Coleman, he was actually better, maybe analytically speaking, at Michigan State in his second year than he was even at Florida State. So at Florida State, he transfers there, and he comes out of the gate, dominates LSU. I asked him about that game, and he was dunking on LSU, just like, yeah, man, it was just so easy. Like everybody just got theirs today. I mean, I just did my thing. And he dominated LSU, which we thought was impressive at the time. And then it turns out LSU had like a, bottom 20 or 30 defense in all of Power 5 conference schools. And so it was an absolute mess and meant nothing for the most part because like everybody dominated LSU all year long. He had a couple of peak moments like LSU and in overtime at Clemson. But for the most part, it was very unimpressive. He'll disappear for 58 minutes, 59 and a half minutes. And then he'll make one crazy under the leg of a defender catch. Like, where was this all game? And so those kind of moments are great. They make great highlights. They do not make every down consistent wide receivers at the NFL level who can create their own separation. He looks very much like a wide receiver. It would have been great in 2003, but not so much in 2024. So not the archetype that we've seen that has been successful from just frankly a film and scouting standpoint. Like honestly, because the separation isn't there. And then the combine numbers confirm what we already see on tape. And then the analytics aren't there either. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess he's not even a top 10 wide receiver, regardless of his capital. So somebody's going to overdraft him. Good luck with that.
People always want to know who the sleepers might be. And sometimes we talk about deep sleepers. It feels like this class, with the names we've mentioned already, rather than being like, deep sleepers, it feels like there might be some high-end sleepers in this particular class. Is there anyone that we haven't talked about today, even if it's more than one part, but who you're quite excited about?
Oh man. That could really like how low, oh man, because I get lost like in the weeds of like hoping somebody will, and like they're gonna be like a 5th or 6th round guy, and I know they're not gonna hit, but I want to root for him anyway. Or like, do you mean like okay?
Well, that they at least make the roster. That they at least make the roster. No, but we're looking at guys like you mentioned, Troy Franklin a minute ago, Devontez Walker, lad. If you go on social media, lad McConkey gets all the buzz. But is any of those guys standing out for you?
I mean, is McConkey, Wes Welker, and Julian Edelman combined and then like better?
Create it in a lab.
Maybe he's going to get overdrafted and be a solid contributor for a very long time. Congrats, Dad. You can separate pretty well.
Overdrafted in fantasy or in the NFL draft?
Both. Maybe even worse in the NFL draft. If he's like, if somebody thinks he's a 1st round pick, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. But so yeah, Xavier Legette. Just to avoid that one, that's a fade, easy. Lad McConkey, probably given his capital, he's going to be a fade. But interesting guys that I am higher on than some are Troy Franklin because of one, the on-field verified athleticism is more freaky than we just saw at the NFL Combine. multiple plays above 22 miles, again, 22 miles an hour, like several times throughout his career. And then just a really, really impressive production profile from just about every angle in both year 2 and 3. So I'm going to be way higher on him, even though he is a little skinnier. So Troy Franklin, even if he doesn't get first round capital, even if he slips, on draft day and he's picked 57, or he pick 67, whatever it is, I don't care. Like, I'm going to be drafting him over guys like McConkey, like Xavier Legette, like, even like Devontez Walker, who was hyped up for a while. Devontez Walker got destroyed at the Senior Bowl. And I know people are, want to be nice and encouraging that week, but he was absolutely freaking embarrassed that week for the first day and a half and dropped a lot of balls. Just had a horrible, horrible week. Kind of cleaned things up down the stretch in day 2, but that killed my evaluation for him, which maybe it shouldn't. But when he faced the toughest competition all week long, he got absolutely shut the heck up and down, like horribly, physically. And so his weight is going to be an issue. How he plays and wins, specifically, I'm more concerned about that than I am Troy Franklin. But just to answer the question in the first place, Roman Wilson might be the guy who I value higher than others and might be a sleeper when it's all said and done, because he dominated that week, and he dominated throughout his career, that week being Senior Bowl, and throughout his career, and people didn't even really notice. Like, his pace last year was ridiculous. I don't know how many touchdowns he had, 6 in like the first 4 or 5 weeks, and he was like the alpha wide receiver from Michigan. Then they kind of flattened out their target distribution, got Colston Loveland involved. Things changed a little bit, but he was the best wide receiver at the Senior Bowl. Like, it wasn't even close. Like, McConkey was maybe close-ish in the same galaxy as Roman Wilson, but he was the dude. Like, he was the guy. And so if you're looking for a guy that killed his what he was asked to do in a lower volume Michigan offense, and then killed the pre-draft process, Roman Wilson's that guy.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because it doesn't seem like he did a ton coming into this year. And the Senior Bowl evaluation is also interesting in that it would seem to me like there are similar elements to that, to like the gauntlet drill. And I realize the gauntlet is not something you actually do in actual football. Are there not risks to evaluating these players in an environment that is so extracted or abstracted from what the normal process would be? Absolutely.
And allow me to reframe. I'm not saying that a huge portion of the eval comes from that 1 week, but when there are questions about a certain aspect of a player's game, and then they get accentuated and kind of reconfirmed in an even worse way than imaginable, in the case of like Devontez Walker, like, there are major concerns. And with Roman Wilson, there was a chance he could come in that week and be the best wide receiver, but when he was and dominated just about every other player, including in many cases Quinion Mitchell, who's going to be the consensus cornerback 1 in this class, there's some signal there in terms of how real NFL teams view him. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's somebody that we kind of just don't talk about for the next few months, and then he's like pick 48 when it's all said and done, and so that if that happens, he's not going to be a sleeper any longer. But given how he won when he was asked to do it, in the capacity that he was, Michigan wide receivers are just a weird eval, because the volume is just not there, and they like to go to tight ends, and they like to spread things out a little bit to wide receivers you will never hear of again outside of one random Saturday because they caught a touchdown and then transferred to Oklahoma. Whatever. It's just like they're a weird offense, and again, Jim Harbaugh is a weird dude, and how they utilize their offensive playmakers was just atypical. I'll just say that. And so his final season, he kind of eclipsed the just from our nerdy numbers standpoint that we care about, like the very bottom of most thresholds you want to see. And that makes him interesting, because he's not going to be overvalued, because he didn't have the crazy through the roof numbers to make everyone swarm to his profile. But I think he's going to outperform our expectations from an analytics standpoint. And people are kind of forgetting how dominant he can be from a film standpoint, and quickly forgetting how dominant he was even at the Senior Bowl. So he's somebody I'm targeting, because he may be an afterthought, but not to me.
Well, Travis, let's jump into this tight end position that I think people are more excited about. Maybe I'm making this up because I don't really see any enthusiasm for these players in early best ball drafts. But after what Sam Laporta did last year, I mean, you've got to know about the tight end prospects, right? And you just have to know about them. We're going to leave out Bowers because, I mean, he's such a superstar, and kind of go to this next level of player. You mentioned previously with discussing the wide receivers at Texas that Jatavian Sanders, somebody who comes in as, basically an athlete, could do anything. And then what he does do is play tight end and play extremely well at Texas. But then, and I mean, he's going to be one of the younger prospects in the class. We love to see that. But he didn't have this sort of blow up combine. And now, I mean, again, if you want to look at it from a best ball perspective to kind of gauge the market, you can see that people are not as interested. Is his combine a concern, or is this guy going to be a star?
I think he's going to be a star. He's going to be probably the clear tight end 2 in this class. There might be one other among the tier 3, I guess, from this class, like Sinnott or Cade Stover or other guys we might talk about. But JT Sanders looks like a difference maker. Yes, the combine wasn't what we wanted it to be, but it was funny. Like, even before, he was very transparent about his expectations with me about what he was hoping to run, and he was hoping, if everything went perfectly, to get in the low 4.6s. And that wasn't necessarily something. And again, this might sound weird, but like certain players, just like they don't. His efforts were less so on just shaving an extra 0.04 off of his 40, and actually prepping to get his body right to where it needs to be for the pros, to where he's going to play. And so he just wasn't. Not that he didn't care. It's just he just was very honest and open. He's like, yeah, if everything goes well, I'll be in the low 4.6s. But I'm not gonna. Because I jokingly asked about him, who would win in a race between him and Xavier Worthy and Jonte Cook, who's coming back, and he's like, oh, Worthy would blow us out the water. But that kind of broke some walls down, and he kind of like started talking about how don't be crazy about it. He's an athletic dude, but I'm not worried. Because, I mean, the on-field vertical speed is there. Back-to-back 600-plus yard seasons for Texas, sharing target loads with 2 also first-round prospects, maybe, in Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell. Like, man, that's really impressive to garner a significant market share and raw volume and win in the way that he did, even though he was fighting with through injury some last fall. So, really impressed by JT Sanders. Clear tight end 2. No one is even close to him still, for me.
Interesting as well. Shawn mentioned that you have to know the tight end prospects coming in, but there's always that potential of an overreaction to what Sam Laporta did last year, and most likely being an outlier versus what we can expect to happen from the 2024 class. But I'm interested to get your thoughts on, should we be overreacting, because we are seeing different profiles now coming out of college the last couple of years with very high-end athleticism. One of those potentially being Ben Sinnott, who had a really strong combine, with elite agility and explosion. Feels like he could have that fit in the NFL and then almost become an instant fantasy prospect. Is he somebody who could, have that immediate impact at the NFL?
Yeah, he's if anyone else is going to be the tight end 2, he would be my second pick. From Kansas State, he was a walk-on there, and part of the reason he actually didn't garner as much interest as a recruit is because he was actually playing so many freaking sports. Like, he played like hockey and baseball, and like he was doing all these other things. Like, I believe it was a half dozen other sports that he was kind of focusing on. Like, it was just wild, his background.
Just a half dozen.
Yeah. So he was basically playing any sport that you could even play. He was probably.
It seems like he just didn't want to go to class. Is that what happened?
I don't know, but no, yeah. So probably, but no, even like through high school and whatnot. So he just wasn't. Football was just not his focus until later, like much later. So he was kind of an afterthought. So when he showed up to Kansas State, he was this freak athlete because he played all these different sports, which translated to just physicality and dominance at the line of scrimmage, and speed and leverage, and understanding how to use his body to just win physically. So he just worked his way up the depth chart and was like, hey, by the way, I went from walk-on to like most productive Big 12 tight end in the country really quickly. So that kind of progression, the diverse athletic background, that really leads me to believe he's got a promising future. given how he wins on field, given his peak production profile as a tight end, as a receiver, and how he dominated the combine in a way that I even didn't really expect. I thought it was going to be good, but not as good as it was. So, yeah, he's kind of tight end 3-ish for me now. And so, yes, I would not be surprised at all if he crushes expectations in year one.
And we don't have to like overly worry that he would be drafted into sort of a non-receiving or non-fantasy type of role.
No, like that's just not his game. Like if you're drafting him and you're asking him to just go, stay in and block as your 6th offensive lineman, like that's not who's going to be the one drafting him to play for their team.
So my guy here, and I say this really knowing very little about him, but we've got a Florida State tight end, impressive numbers in 2021. After the transfer to Florida State, impressive numbers on a per play basis in 2023. I mean, he has a strong tight end. Again, it may be early for people to be really looking at these tight ends and considering them for some of the things they want to do in fantasy. But if I'm drafting him in the last round, am I throwing away that pick? Is this guy like a really cool sleeper or an irrelevant player for, I mean, not for an NFL team, obviously, but for fantasy in the future?
He's kind of a long shot. Like Jaheim Bell, that is from a size standpoint, there's not many comps that you look and go, oh, that obviously he fits in this archetype and will succeed because of this. So it's like, no, he's either like Delaney Walker or he's probably going to be a miss. Like maybe if you round up on his physical numbers, he's Jonnu Smith, who's not been necessarily elite for fantasy football over his career. But, the ideal projection is Delaney Walker, especially like mid to late career Delaney Walker for the Tennessee Titans, where they were lining him up in like this H-back roll, this like, bringing him across the formation, quick motion, and all this end around and getting creative in his usage. Because if you just line him up as like an inline guy and ask him to block ever, again, you wouldn't want to use him that way very much, but you almost can't with him because of his size and because of his specific ability. So he's either this like kind of jumbo slot or this receiving only tight end, or this guy that you have to get creative to build a package for practically at the next level, or he's just kind of a miss, And so, and even if you are building like a specific package for him, does that mean then he's not your every down guy? So I would like to be higher on Jaheim Bell, but I'm not. I think he will probably be 5th-ish off the board on draft day, but unless he's Delaney Walker, he's probably going to disappoint for fantasy football.
Man, I loved Delaney Walker when he was playing.
Oh, he's so good. So good. And
if we can,
he was not very tall either. He was like 6'1", maybe. It's like, I'm 6'1", and I was looking him right in the eye. I was like, I might be taller than you. Like, he was not a very big guy. So just kind of a huge outlier, but Jaheim Bell will have to be as well.
Any other players that we need to know about at the position, or is it those higher end guys and then it drops off?
Yeah, Cade Stover. Oh, well, tight ends in general. Like if you follow recruiting, if you follow college football, a lot of guys that end up at the tight end position, they didn't start there. They're like a defensive end or a linebacker or a running back or just a wide receiver or something weird, and now they're all of a sudden a tight end. And that was what happened with Stover at times. Like he was. Like they were like, I'm not sure, where you're going to be going to step in and be a, this edge rusher guy. Like his experience at tight end is limited. I'll just say that. And so he might have room to grow. Had a pretty productive season for Ohio State. I believe over 500 yards last year as a receiver for them. So if somebody comes out and wows anyway, despite the, lack of, consistent resume, and, he didn't test as an elite athlete at the combine either. He might be somebody to keep an eye on for sure. And then another guy I actually had the opportunity to interview here recently, Eric All, Iowa tight end, but before that, Michigan. He he's been really just riddled with injury. He had a back surgery in 2022 that he really struggled to recover from and just get back and right from. And then tore his ACL even after getting right at Iowa. So we were kind of robbed of what we could have seen from him. But he earned team captain status after his 2021 breakout season, had over 400 yards at the time for Michigan. and it really looked like he was on track to be an early round projected tight end, but it just missed almost all of his 2022, almost all of his 2023. And so we didn't get to see what could have been special. But in terms of being a locker room guy that a team's going to draft because he just kills the interview process, it's going to be him. And he's rising here recently because I think of the pre-draft process from sources that I've talked to. He's rising quickly and could surprise us and actually be one of those guys that's like, oh, a round 3 pick for Eric All or a round 4 pick for Eric All. That's interesting. And so that's somebody to keep your eye on because of all that he went through to even produce it all at Iowa, and the injuries that he's fought through, and the leadership that he possesses. And as I was talking about to him about this past year at Iowa, he was a leader in Michigan's offense, like throughout their playoff runs and everything. But he had the humility and understanding to learn from the veteran at Iowa, Luke Legette, who should be a top 50-ish pick next year, tight end. And he was talking to me about like just sticking to that guy's hip and understanding, like, even though Luke Legette is younger than him, like he could have had this superiority complex over Luke Legette. He did not. He was like, I'm going to learn from this guy who's going to lead me right now, as I'm the new guy. So that kind of mentality is just admirable. And maybe I'm just biased because I learned so much about him, but he's somebody that I'm rooting for and think has all the tools to succeed if he stays healthy.
That's awesome. And this has been awesome having you on, Travis, for the last 2 episodes of RotoViz Overtime. For people who haven't had a chance to check out the first show, we talked quarterbacks and running backs. Today, obviously, tight ends, wide receivers, a lot of ground covered. And Shawn, we mentioned this a lot, but in our opinion, one of the absolute best to get on the show to talk through the prospects is always Travis. So our yearly tradition continues. We look forward to 2025 when we can do it all over again. But Travis, this has been an absolute pleasure. For people who haven't followed Travis on Twitter yet, you can follow him over at FF_Travis M. You can check out his work over at A to Z Sports. That is where you can find him. Yeah. I nailed it that time. But absolutely brilliant, Travis, and thanks as always for coming on and joining us.
Appreciate you all. I'm glad to join my RotoViz family for a long time. It's funny. It's been like 5 years since I first started contributing back with you all at RotoViz and doing the show with Curtis Patrick. And it's just always glad to talk through some prospects with you guys and see the lovely faces as well.
Travis, thank you again so much. This is one of my favorite episodes. Learned so much. Enjoy hearing from you and catching up in addition to it. This has been fantastic. Again, thank you.
Awesome stuff. So we will leave it there. We will be back with another RotoViz OT later in the week. As always, subscribe to the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed to get those once they are available. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at OverToMarlin. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out his work up on rotoviz.com. And until next time, have a good one.